The first time we saw it, I froze mid-step, the coffee cup trembling in my hand. Just 10 feet from our porch, a bear sat as if it belonged there, staring through the morning fog with eyes so knowing they felt like they could see into our very thoughts. It wasn't the size of the creature, though it was massive, nor the sharp claws glinting faintly in the early light. It was the way it simply existed, a presence so calm and deliberate that the world seemed to pause around it. And then it left something behind. Something small, strange, almost deliberate, and I had no idea why. We had just moved into the cabin a few weeks earlier. Mark and I had spent our lives in the city, the kind of city where squirrels were the closest thing to wildlife, and the idea of a bear casually sitting outside our home would have been laughable if it weren't happening right now. The forest around us was dense and untamed, a river winding silently through pines and oaks, mist rising in lazy curls as the sun stretched its first fingers across the treetops. The bear didn't move when we whispered to each other, didn't flinch when I slowly backed inside to grab my camera. Its presence was unshakable, like it had been waiting for this moment. I remember thinking, briefly, that maybe we had walked into a dream. But dreams don't leave smooth, oval stones on your porch. That's what caught my attention first. Between the rough grains of the old wood lay a small stone, polished in a way that made it shimmer faintly, almost like it was catching light from somewhere else entirely. I knelt down to pick it up, half expecting it to vanish the moment I touched it. The bear watched, still silent, still patient, and then it turned and disappeared into the shadows of the pines without a sound. The next morning, I woke to the sound of something moving outside. Pulling back the curtain, my heart leapt. There it was again, sitting in the exact same spot, watching the cabin as though it were inspecting us, as if some invisible ledger were recording every gesture we made. This time, it wasn't a stone. A pine cone, unusually symmetrical, lay on the porch, small enough to fit in the palm of my hand but perfectly formed, a miniature work of nature's architecture. I swallowed, a mix of fear and fascination pressing in my chest. Mark shook his head when I told him over breakfast. "It's a bear, not a visitor with manners," he said. But there was a tremor in his voice, and I caught it. There was something here we didn't understand. Something beyond food, beyond instinct. Bears weren't meant to linger, especially not in broad daylight, not like they were choosing to spend time here, choosing to interact in some way we couldn't yet define. And every time it returned, we found something new, a tiny feather one day, a smooth river stone the next. Little gifts, carefully placed, as if someone or something had a reason we weren't privy to. The days blurred together. Each morning, I woke with a mix of dread and anticipation. Would it come today? Would it bring another strange object? There was a rhythm developing, one I could feel in the pit of my stomach before I even glimpsed it through the curtains. And I began to notice details I hadn't before, the way it shifted its weight, how its ears twitched at the smallest sounds, how it sniffed the air as though listening for something far beyond our perception. And always, those eyes. Quiet, steady, impossible to read, yet brimming with something. A message, perhaps, or a warning. Neighbors warned us. "Keep a safe distance," they said. "Don't encourage it. Bears are dangerous." But there was a strange reluctance in their advice, as if even they knew that something unusual was happening on our porch. They didn't see it, not really. They didn't see the way it seemed to be waiting, the way it chose the precise moment to appear, as if it had a schedule or a purpose. And it wasn't just the items it left, it was the way it made us pause, made us notice the small miracles we had always overlooked in our daily lives. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky bled pink and gold, it lingered longer than usual. I stepped outside, holding my camera as if it could somehow bridge the gap between worlds, and it didn't flinch. Instead, it moved with slow, deliberate steps to the far corner of the porch and left something that made me catch my breath, a small, roughly carved figure of a bear. No larger than my fist, wood-polished smooth, and yet imbued with a lifelike essence that seemed impossible to capture in anything man-made. For a moment, the world held its breath. Mark came out behind me, and even he couldn't speak. We stared at it, hearts thumping, as the bear turned, looked back at us one last time, and melted into the forest shadows. It was gone, leaving only the figure and a silence so profound it felt sacred. I reached down and picked it up, and for a brief moment, I could swear the air shifted around me. Something had passed between us. Something older than fear, older than reason, something that belonged neither to man nor beast, but to the quiet space where wonder lives. That night, we couldn't sleep. We spoke in whispers, hesitant to break the fragile magic that had settled over the cabin. Every creak of the porch, every rustle of the leaves outside, sent our minds racing. What did it mean? Why us? And, most pressing of all, would it return? Deep down, we knew the answer wasn't simple, and yet the hope burned brightly, that in a world often ruled by routine and distraction, there were still moments that could take your breath away, moments that reminded you that life wasn't just happening, it was speaking to you, in small, perfect, mysterious ways. And so began the pattern. Every evening, we waited. Every morning, we discovered something new. Each encounter left us more entangled in a mystery we couldn't explain, a connection we couldn't name, a story that was only just beginning. Little did we know, what the bear would leave behind next would change everything. The days turned into weeks, and the visits became a rhythm we could almost predict. Every evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees, we'd sit quietly on the porch, our coffee cooling in the fading light, and wait. Sometimes the bear appeared right on schedule, other times, we'd worry it wouldn't come at all. But each arrival carried with it the same stillness, the same deliberate gaze, the same silent message we couldn't yet decipher. One evening, Laura leaned back in her chair, notebook open, sketching the bear's movements. "It's studying us," she whispered. "Not like it wants food, not like it's hunting, it's observing, learning, maybe even communicating." I laughed nervously, but her eyes were serious, wide, and reflective. The bear shifted slightly, its heavy paws making barely a sound on the wooden boards, and I thought I saw a faint glimmer in its eyes, as if it understood every word. We began leaving small offerings, apples, honey, even a little bread. At first, the bear barely touched them. Then, gradually, it began sampling, carefully, deliberately, but always leaving something else behind. A tiny feather one night, a perfect river pebble the next. There was a rhythm, an exchange, subtle and almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. Each object seemed more intentional than the last, carrying a weight we couldn't explain. One morning, I found a feather lying on the porch beside the wooden bear figure. It was white, almost glowing, delicate enough to vanish with a single breeze, and yet it seemed to hum with meaning. I held it in my hand, tracing its soft lines, and for a moment the air itself felt different, thicker, alive. Laura knelt beside me, whispering, "It's like it's telling a story, but we're only seeing the first page." But not every visit was gentle. One night, a sudden snap of a branch in the darkness startled us. The bear's ears twitched, its head turned sharply, and for the first time, it growled, not at us, not aggressively, but in warning. Something had moved in the forest beyond the clearing. My heart pounded, but the bear stayed. It returned to the porch, still calm, still deliberate, as if to say, "I am here, and I will protect what belongs here." That night, sleep was impossible. Every creak of the cabin, every whisper of wind through the pines felt like a signal. Mark and I spoke in hushed tones, recounting every detail of the bear's behavior. What did the objects mean? Why did it appear only at certain times? Each answer we imagined seemed too small, too simple for the weight of what we were witnessing. Weeks passed. The bear became more than a visitor. It was a presence, a companion of sorts. And with each visit, the objects grew more intricate. A small, twisted branch shaped like a heart. A pine cone perfectly split in two halves, aligned with care. A tiny pebble engraved with faint lines, so subtle we might have missed it if we weren't looking closely. Each item was a puzzle, a gift, a message, and yet none of it made sense, at least, not yet. One afternoon, Laura shared a story from her childhood, about a bear in the mountains near her grandmother's house. It had appeared in her dreams, guiding her, protecting her, leaving small tokens she only understood years later. "Maybe it's the same here," she said quietly. "Maybe it's trying to guide us, to teach us something we can't yet see." I wanted to dismiss it as fantasy, but the bear's careful, deliberate presence told me otherwise. Then came the night that changed everything. The bear arrived unusually early, moving with urgency, its eyes flicking to the forest beyond. It didn't settle in its usual spot. Instead, it placed something directly at the center of the porch, a small, carved piece of wood shaped like a tiny bear, polished to a soft sheen. It looked almost alive in the fading light, as though it had a soul. Mark and I stared, speechless, and the bear simply watched, silent, before retreating into the forest shadows without a backward glance. We held it in our hands, turning it slowly, feeling the weight of something older than us. I realized then that this was more than a gift. It was a message. And though we couldn't yet decipher it fully, it carried meaning beyond our understanding. A reminder that some connections, some wonders, were meant to be experienced rather than explained. Sleep returned that night, lighter and dream-filled. And in those dreams, the bear appeared once more, sitting on our porch, eyes glinting, and a faint whisper seemed to pass through the leaves. "Notice. Appreciate. Remember." In the mornings after, the objects became even more intricate, more deliberate, as if the bear understood that we were paying attention, that we were listening. And so the pattern deepened. Each visit layered mystery over familiarity. Each object whispered secrets we could not yet hear. Each glance from the bear reminded us that the world still held magic, still held the quiet wonder that had drawn us to this cabin in the first place. And we waited, hearts poised, knowing that the story was far from over, and that the bear's next gift might change everything we thought we knew about the line between nature and the human heart. The forest seemed to lean in closer with each passing day, the wind carrying a subtle rhythm, almost like a heartbeat. We began noticing things we had never seen before, the slight tilt of a branch, the pattern of fallen leaves, the whisper of a creek as if it had its own language. And somewhere within all of it, the bear was teaching us to see, to feel, to notice. And then, one morning, Laura stepped onto the porch and froze. The bear hadn't just left something behind this time, it had left a small trail, leading deeper into the forest. A path of perfectly placed objects, each one hinting at a story we had not yet begun to understand. Our hearts raced, our minds spun with questions, and for the first time, we realized that we were being invited to follow, to learn, to see beyond the familiar, into a world that had quietly been waiting for us all along. The trail of objects stretched deeper into the forest than we had dared imagine. Each piece, pine cone split in perfect halves, smooth river stones, tiny feathers, was laid with deliberate care, forming a path that seemed to pulse with intention. Mark gripped my hand, his eyes wide, and I felt a shiver of anticipation. We had become part of something larger, something older than ourselves, something that didn't fit neatly into our understanding of the world. We followed cautiously, stepping over roots and brushing past low-hanging branches. The forest was alive in a way it hadn't been before, sounds sharper, colors more vivid, light filtering through leaves in golden beams that seemed to spotlight our path. And there, ahead, the bear waited at a small clearing, calm, patient, as if acknowledging that we had accepted its invitation. Its eyes held a depth that made my breath catch, like it had seen the entire story of our lives and understood our unspoken thoughts. At the center of the clearing, it left a final object, a wooden figure, larger than the first, carved in exquisite detail, every curve and fur line perfect. It radiated a quiet warmth, an energy that made the air feel heavier and more alive. I knelt, hands trembling, lifting it slowly. The bear shifted, sniffed the figure, and then retreated a few paces, watching. The message was clear, though unspoken. This was not a mere gift, but a bridge, a way to understand, to connect, to recognize a part of life we had long overlooked. We sat in silence, hearts racing, each of us overwhelmed by a sense of awe and reverence. No words could capture the enormity of what was unfolding. I traced the lines of the figure, feeling the craftsmanship, sensing the life within it. And then, almost imperceptibly, the bear nodded, or perhaps it was only the tilt of its massive head, but in that motion, I felt a profound acknowledgement, a silent communication that transcended species, language, and logic. The journey back to the cabin was quiet, filled with a reflective energy neither of us wanted to break. Every step seemed heavier, yet lighter, as if the weight of wonder balanced the burdens we had carried for years. The objects left behind, the trails through the forest, the deliberate gestures of the bear, they were pieces of a story, fragments of an understanding we were only beginning to glimpse. That night, we placed the wooden figure on the porch, in a spot where the morning sun would strike it first. It caught the light in a way that made it shimmer faintly, as if breathing, alive with an energy we could feel but not name. And though the bear did not return that night, a presence lingered, soft, protective, a reminder that the connection we had been gifted was ongoing, invisible yet undeniable. In the days that followed, we discovered that each object, each visit, had subtly shifted something inside us. We noticed the small wonders of life, the way sunlight danced through leaves, the delicate patterns of frost on our windows, the quiet rhythm of the creek behind the cabin. The bear had not only visited us, it had taught us to see, to listen, to honor the magic threaded through ordinary moments. And then, on a morning bathed in gold, we noticed something we hadn't seen before. The carved figure had changed slightly. Its surface caught the light differently, almost as if it had absorbed some essence of the forest, some trace of the bear's visits. We realized, with a mix of wonder and disbelief, that the story wasn't finished. The bear had not merely left a gift, it had left a living reminder that connection, patience, and attention could transform the world around us, and within us. Mark turned to me, voice barely above a whisper, "Do you think it will come back?" I smiled, knowing that it didn't matter. The bear's visits had already changed us in ways we couldn't yet measure, ways we would carry for the rest of our lives. And somewhere in the quiet forest, I knew it was still watching, still guiding, still leaving pieces of its story behind, pieces we were lucky enough to find. And so our days continued, filled with anticipation and quiet reverence. Every creak of the porch, every fluttering leaf, every shimmer of light held the possibility of a message, a lesson, a connection we might have otherwise missed. The bear had become a bridge between the ordinary and the extraordinary, reminding us that magic exists, not in grand gestures, but in the delicate, deliberate moments that demand our attention, patience, and awe. The bear's trail through our lives was subtle, unassuming, yet monumental. And though it no longer appeared with the same frequency, its presence was felt in every glance, every breath, every heartbeat. We had learned to pause, to notice, to honor the small gifts the world offered. And deep inside, we understood that this was only the beginning of a story, a connection, and a sense of wonder that would follow us forever. Even now, sometimes, when the wind shifts or the sun catches the trees just right, I swear I see it. A flicker of movement, a shadow, a presence that reminds us that the world is alive with stories, and that sometimes the smallest gestures carry the greatest meaning. The weeks passed, but the bear's visits became more unpredictable. Sometimes it appeared at dawn, sometimes as the last streak of sunlight faded behind the trees. The objects it left grew stranger and more intricate, a perfect spiral of pebbles, a cluster of moss arranged like a miniature garden, even a tiny bone, smooth and worn, placed in the center of the porch as if marking a sacred spot. We didn't touch some of these things immediately. They felt too deliberate, too meaningful, like stepping into someone else's quiet ritual. Mark started noticing patterns. The bear never moved in haste. It would arrive, pause at a distance, then take slow, deliberate steps toward the porch, its gaze flicking between us and the forest beyond. Sometimes it paused to sniff the air, ears twitching, almost as though it were listening to something far beyond our senses. The forest itself seemed to respond, shadows stretching differently, birds falling silent, the wind holding still. We began to wonder if it was guiding us, teaching us something invisible yet essential. One rainy afternoon, we noticed a change. The bear didn't just leave objects, it seemed to be arranging the forest itself. Fallen branches pointed toward a stream, moss formed a path through dense undergrowth, and even the placement of stones seemed like directions. We followed the subtle cues, hearts pounding, each step revealing more of the forest's hidden design. It was no longer just a visitor, it was a teacher, a messenger, and we were the students. Laura began documenting everything meticulously. Sketches, notes, photographs. The forest became a living journal. I watched her, captivated not just by her dedication, but by the transformation in us. We had become part of a rhythm, a quiet dance with the wilderness, guided by an unexpected, powerful presence. And with each new item, each gesture, each gaze from the bear, the questions deepened. Why us? Why here? And most of all, what was the message hidden in these gifts? Then came the night that changed everything. We had fallen asleep to the sound of rain pattering on the roof, only to be awakened by a soft thump on the porch. I peered through the window and froze. The bear had arrived, but it wasn't alone. Behind it, a smaller bear, possibly a cub, cautiously stepped into view. They both paused, studying us silently, before leaving a single, large object between them, a carved wooden amulet, etched with symbols neither Mark nor I recognized. Its surface pulsed faintly in the moonlight, as though alive. The presence of the cub changed everything. We realized the bear wasn't just connecting with us, it was teaching us about life, legacy, and protection. It had brought part of its family into our world, and in that gesture, it demanded respect and reflection. Mark and I sat in stunned silence, feeling the weight of the moment pressing into our hearts. Over the next days, the visits became a silent dialogue. Objects appeared more frequently, often arranged in pairs, clusters, or sequences, as if forming a story in code. A circle of stones one morning, a line of pine cones the next, and always, something that hinted at meaning beyond our comprehension. We felt ourselves being drawn into the bear's world, learning patience, observation, and a quiet reverence we had forgotten we were capable of. One afternoon, Laura found a small, polished stone with a shape she recognized immediately, the outline of a bear etched perfectly in its curves. She gasped, clutching it to her chest. "It's showing us who it is," she whispered, voice trembling. "It wants us to see it, not just as a creature, but as a presence, as a being with intention, with history." I nodded, realizing that the bear's purpose was not merely curiosity, it was teaching us awareness, connection, and perhaps even gratitude. Tension mounted as we tried to interpret the messages. Was the bear asking for something in return? Was it testing us? Or was it simply showing us a world that humans often ignored, full of subtle patterns and quiet wisdom? Nights were spent in reflection, days in careful observation. We noticed the small miracles, a leaf patterned like a star, dewdrops aligned perfectly on a spiderweb, a squirrel pausing to leave a nut near the porch as though participating in the ritual. Each small detail felt orchestrated, purposeful. And then came the moment we'd been both dreading and hoping for. One evening, after a week without a visit, a soft knock echoed on the porch. I opened the door to find not the bear, but an object, a small carved wooden figure of a bear cub, seated carefully atop the largest stone on the porch. No footprints, no sign of passage. Just the cub figure, staring at us as if expecting something. It was a message, a puzzle, and an invitation all at once. We held it in silence, hearts pounding, and realized that the bear's gifts were not just objects, they were threads, weaving a story that only patience, attention, and openness could reveal. The forest had become a living narrative, the bear a quiet author, and we had been invited into its story in ways we would never forget. As night settled over the cabin, we felt an almost tangible anticipation, a sense that the next visit would reveal something monumental. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle a whisper, every distant owl a messenger. We had entered a delicate balance with the forest, guided by the bear, and every moment was charged with expectation, wonder, and a hint of fear. And then, from deep within the trees, a faint movement, the bear, larger than ever in our perception, stepping silently toward the porch, the cub close behind. The forest seemed to hold its breath, waiting, watching, as if the world itself had paused to witness what would come next. We realized in that moment that nothing about this was ordinary. Every visit, every object, every gesture had been leading to something, an understanding, a revelation, a connection that would change the way we saw the world, each other, and ourselves. And as the bear stepped onto the porch, leaving the cub figure beside the stone, we knew the true message was about to be revealed. The forest held a quiet promise: patience, observation, and reverence would be rewarded. And we were ready to see, finally, what the bear had been waiting to show us all along. The next morning, the forest felt charged. The air was heavier, scented with pine and damp earth, and the mist curled like living tendrils between the trees. We stepped onto the porch cautiously, scanning for any sign of the bear. The carved cub figure lay where it had been left, but the larger objects, the spiral of pebbles, the moss garden, the polished stones, had been rearranged overnight, forming a path that seemed to beckon us deeper into the woods. Mark bent to inspect the objects, running his fingers along the smooth surfaces. "It's deliberate," he said quietly, eyes wide with a mix of awe and apprehension. "Each piece is placed with intention. It's guiding us." The thought made my stomach twist with excitement and unease. We had followed hints and subtle cues before, but this felt different. This felt like an invitation to step beyond observation and into participation. We followed the path, careful to place our feet lightly, not disturbing a single object. The forest seemed alive in ways we had never noticed, the wind carrying distant rustling, the shadows shifting like they were breathing, and a faint glimmer here and there that caught in our peripheral vision. The bear had become a silent conductor of the forest symphony, and we were learning to hear it. Halfway along the trail, the bear appeared, sitting on a fallen log, calm but commanding. The cub remained close behind, eyes alert, observing us as we paused. It was then that we noticed something unusual, a small pile of objects arranged into a shape we recognized immediately, a circle, enclosing a tiny wooden bear carved by the bear itself, perfectly centered. The alignment was precise, almost ritualistic, and the sight sent a shiver through me. Laura knelt beside the circle, tracing its edges with her finger. "It's a ceremony," she whispered. "Not for us. For something bigger, something sacred." The words hung in the misty air. I looked at the bear, and for the first time, I felt the full weight of its intelligence and intent. This was not random curiosity, not simple communication. This was a lesson, a ritual, a story told in silence and symbols. Suddenly, the bear rose, its massive frame casting long shadows across the forest floor. It moved deliberately, circling the objects once, twice, then stopping to sniff each one. Its movements were fluid, purposeful, almost ceremonial. We held our breath, feeling the tension build, sensing that the forest itself was holding still for this moment. And then, it stepped toward us, nudging a flat stone closer with its nose. On it lay a small carving, faint but intricate, a bear with an outstretched paw, pointing toward the deeper woods. Mark's hand shook as he picked it up. "It's showing us where to go," he said, disbelief and awe mingling in his voice. I nodded, feeling the same rush of fear and wonder. Following the bear's direction, we moved deeper into the forest, aware that each step was part of an unfolding story, and that at any moment we could witness something extraordinary. The path led us to a small clearing we had never seen before, bathed in dappled sunlight that filtered through the high canopy. And there it was, a cluster of objects unlike any we had encountered. Pine cones arranged in intricate spirals, moss forming miniature hills, stones aligned like tiny monuments, and at the center, a larger wooden figure, a bear standing tall, head raised, carved with such precision it seemed alive. The bear and its cub sat patiently at the edge of the clearing, watching our reactions. Laura knelt to inspect the figure, tracing the carved lines. "It's magnificent," she breathed. "It's teaching us something, but I don't yet understand what." Her words were barely audible over the soft rustle of leaves and the distant babble of a creek. I stood frozen, sensing the gravity of the moment. The bear had led us here for a reason. Something was about to be revealed. And then it happened. The bear nudged the wooden cub figure toward the larger figure, circling it slowly. Each movement was precise, deliberate. We realized that the bear was performing the story it wanted us to witness, the cub being guided, taught, protected, a narrative of care, patience, and connection. Our hearts pounded as we absorbed the weight of the lesson. The bear paused, looking directly at us, and in that gaze, I felt 1,000 unspoken truths. The importance of attention, the power of patience, the depth of connection that exists between life, nature, and the quiet spaces in between. The cub mirrored the adult's gestures, and in that silent choreography, we understood this was more than a gift. It was a legacy. Then, almost imperceptibly, the adult bear shifted its weight and left a final object at our feet. A small carved amulet, etched with symbols we couldn't immediately decipher, polished smooth as if worn by time itself. The energy radiating from it was palpable, a quiet hum that seemed to resonate within our very bones. It was a gift, yes, but also a key, a challenge to pay attention, to carry the lesson beyond this clearing, beyond this cabin, into our daily lives. We picked it up, hands trembling, and the bear stepped back, melting into the forest shadows with the cub close behind. A silence fell over the clearing, thick and sacred, leaving us with a sense of awe and reverence that refused to dissipate. We understood, in that moment, that the story had reached a turning point. The bear had revealed its purpose, but the lesson, the true impact, was ours to carry forward. Mark turned to me, voice hushed. "Do you realize what just happened? It trusted us, it included us." I nodded, breathless, understanding that the bear's visits were never random. Every object, every gesture, every gaze had been designed to prepare us for this revelation. The forest felt different now, alive with meaning in every leaf, stone, and shadow. The following days were filled with reflection. The bear no longer needed to visit as often. Its lesson had been delivered, but the impact lingered. We began noticing patterns in our own lives, small synchronicities, moments of beauty that demanded our attention. The carved amulet became a symbol, a reminder that patience, observation, and connection could reveal truths we might otherwise miss. One evening, as the sun dipped low, we glimpsed movement at the forest edge. The bear and its cub lingered a moment, silhouettes against the amber sky, then disappeared into the trees. It was a farewell, but not a complete goodbye. The forest, the objects, the lessons, they remained etched into our lives, quiet but profound, waiting for us to notice, to honor, and to carry forward. We realized that the story was not about possession or control, but about attention, presence, and reverence. Each visit, each object, each gesture had been a call to witness, to participate in the quiet magic of life, to recognize that the smallest details often carry the deepest truths. And in that realization, we felt a connection to the bear, the forest, and to life itself that would endure long after the last object was left behind. The following morning, the forest was unusually still, as if holding its breath. Mist curled low along the trees, and the air smelled of wet pine and earth. Mark and I stepped onto the porch, eyes scanning for signs of the bear. Nothing. Yet the carved amulet from the previous visit pulsed with quiet energy in my hand, as though reminding us that the forest's lesson was far from over. We followed the familiar path, every step measured, every glance alert. The bear's objects, pebbles, feathers, moss, were now forming a pattern we had never noticed before, a subtle spiral leading to a small glade at the edge of the creek. The arrangement felt intentional, purposeful, as though the bear was inviting us into the final chapter of its story. At the center of the glade, the bear awaited, with the cub at its side. Their presence was serene yet commanding. Between them lay the culmination of all previous gifts, a larger, exquisitely carved wooden figure, a full bear family, adult, cub, and hidden infant, each detail painstakingly rendered. It radiated a quiet warmth that made the hair on my arms rise. The bear nudged the figure toward us. I knelt, heart pounding, tracing the carved lines. Each curve seemed alive, each expression infused with subtle emotion. We realized then that the gifts weren't merely objects, they were narratives, stories encoded in wood and nature, meant to teach us patience, attention, and connection. The cub mirrored the adult's movements, circling the objects in deliberate motions. I could feel a quiet rhythm, almost like a heartbeat in the clearing, a pulse that linked the forest, the bears, and us together. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of wind, every distant bird seemed to respond to the choreography, emphasizing that we were part of something larger. Mark whispered, voice trembling with awe, "It's a story of family, of guidance, of teaching. It's showing us the bonds that sustain life, the importance of patience and observation." I nodded, realizing that the bear's purpose had never been to frighten, to entertain, or even to communicate plainly. Its purpose was to guide us into awareness, to awaken a deeper understanding of life itself. Suddenly, the bear shifted, nudging a small cluster of stones toward us. Arranged carefully, they formed a symbol, a spiral enveloping a small circle, almost like a key. I picked it up and traced the pattern with my finger. It felt alive, vibrating faintly beneath my touch. The bear's gaze met mine, steady and calm, and I understood. This was the final invitation. A chance to truly connect, to witness, and to carry the lesson beyond the forest. We sat in silence, absorbing the moment, feeling a profound stillness descend. The bear and its cub waited patiently, as if allowing us to fully internalize the experience. Every detail, the placement of stones, the lines of the carved figures, the rhythm of their gestures, spoke to a wisdom older than any words we could comprehend. And then, as the sun reached its peak, the bear rose and stepped back. It lingered for a moment, looking at us with an expression that felt like both farewell and blessing. The cub followed, and together they retreated into the shadows of the trees, leaving the carved figures and stones behind, silent witnesses to a story we had been privileged to witness. The glade seemed to exhale as if the forest itself recognized the conclusion of the ritual. We walked among the objects slowly, tracing the spiral of stones, observing the careful placement of each feather and pebble. Each item felt sacred, each detail a lesson etched into our minds and hearts. And I realized, the bear's gifts were not just for us, but for anyone who approached life with openness, patience, and reverence. Returning to the cabin, we carried a quiet reverence with us. The amulet pulsed faintly in my pocket, a reminder that the experience was ongoing, not confined to the glade. We noticed small wonders everywhere, the patterns of frost on the porch, the shimmer of dew on leaves, the gentle ripple of the creek. Every ordinary detail had become extraordinary, infused with meaning by the bear's careful teaching. Weeks passed. The bear no longer visited daily, but its presence was tangible. We discovered that life itself had become a series of small, deliberate lessons, the importance of patience, the beauty of observation, the subtlety of connection. Each object left behind, each pattern, each carved figure had been a guide, and the memory of it shaped how we moved through the world. One evening, as the sky bled amber and gold, we caught a glimpse of movement at the forest's edge. The adult bear and the cub paused, silhouettes against the fading light. Their eyes met ours for the briefest of moments. A connection passed silently between us, a mutual understanding that what had been taught would remain, carried forward by attention, reverence, and love. We realized then that the bear's story was now ours. Its gifts were lessons in mindfulness, patience, and the quiet power of connection. And though the forest returned to its normal rhythms, the impact of those visits lingered, forever altering how we perceived the ordinary, and how we honored the extraordinary hidden within it. The forest, the bear, and the objects had become a living testament that magic exists not in grand gestures, but in subtle patterns, deliberate care, and the attention we bring to life. And sometimes, when the light catches a stone just right or a feather drifts gently to the porch, we feel it again, the presence, the lesson, the quiet bridge between human and nature, waiting for us to notice. And though the bear no longer leaves new objects, we know the story isn't finished. Its influence echoes in every moment, in every gesture, in every detail of our lives. And perhaps, one day, it will return, bringing new lessons, new gifts, and a reminder that the world is alive with quiet wonder, waiting for us to open our eyes and hearts. The morning air was crisp, tinged with the scent of pine and damp earth. The forest held a hushed expectancy, like the world itself knew something was about to unfold. Mark and I stepped onto the porch, feeling a subtle vibration beneath our feet, a sense that the rhythm of the forest had changed. The carved wooden amulet pulsed faintly in my hand, a reminder that today was different, that the bear's story was reaching its peak. We followed the trail of objects deeper into the woods. Each step felt heavier with anticipation. The stones and feathers were arranged in spirals and lines more intricate than ever, forming patterns that drew us toward a clearing we hadn't yet discovered. My pulse quickened, a mix of awe and fear, because we knew instinctively that whatever awaited us would change everything. At the edge of the clearing, the adult bear waited, the cub beside it. But this time, there was a difference. Between them lay a massive, hollowed log, carved with elaborate designs, almost like a miniature cathedral of nature. It radiated warmth and energy, as if it had absorbed sunlight, wind, and rain over decades. The air hummed faintly around it, vibrating with an unspoken power. I approached it cautiously, heart pounding. The bear watched without moving, its gaze steady and calm. The cub mirrored its movements, small eyes wide and alert. Then, with a gentle nudge, the adult bear encouraged us closer to the log. Inside, we saw the culmination of all previous gifts, an arrangement of carved wooden figures, stones, feathers, and moss that told a story of care, protection, legacy, and the quiet magic that binds life together. Laura whispered, voice trembling, "It's everything. All the lessons, all the moments, all the meaning. It's here, all at once." Her hand brushed a carved figure of a bear cub, delicately positioned as if being guided by the adult figure. I felt tears prick my eyes, realizing that the bear's purpose had been building toward this singular, profound moment of revelation. Then, the adult bear stepped forward, placing a massive paw on the carved log as if sealing the story. The cub followed suit, nudging a tiny feather into place. It was a silent ritual, yet the meaning was unmistakable. Trust, attention, presence, and reverence are the greatest gifts we can offer the world, and they are returned in kind. We sat down, breathing slowly, absorbing the enormity of what we were witnessing. The carvings, the objects, the patterns, they weren't just gifts. They were an invitation, a teaching, a bridge between the forest, the bears, and our own human hearts. Every detail pulsed with intention. Every movement, deliberate. Every glance, filled with meaning. Then came the final, subtle gesture. The bear nudged the largest figure, a representation of the adult itself, toward us. Within its carved lines, we saw something new, not just the story of the bears, but a reflection of our own lives. The figures mirrored our curiosity, our patience, our reverence, and even our fear. The bear had created a mirror, showing us that the lessons of the forest were lessons of the heart. Mark whispered, eyes wide, "It's us. It's our story too." I nodded, feeling the weight of the truth settle in my chest. The bear's final gift was not an object, it was understanding. It had taught us to see, to notice, to honor the small wonders, and in doing so, it had left an indelible mark on our hearts. As we stood to leave the clearing, the bear and cub retreated into the forest shadows, moving with the fluidity and grace of beings utterly at home in their world. But something lingered, a presence, a pulse, a quiet echo of what we had experienced. The carvings, the log, the patterns, they remained, waiting for the next careful observer to discover, to learn, and to connect. Back at the cabin, the air felt different. The forest outside seemed alive in a new way, every leaf, every branch, every rustle infused with meaning. The carved log and its figures were placed on the porch, catching morning sunlight. Each time we looked at them, we were reminded of the bear's lesson. Life is alive with subtle magic, waiting for us to notice, and patience and attention reveal truths beyond comprehension. That evening, as we sat quietly with the last remnants of daylight slipping behind the trees, Laura turned to me. "It's not just a story about bears," she said softly. "It's about everything we've overlooked, the quiet miracles, the subtle connections, the gifts hidden in plain sight." I smiled, realizing that the bear's presence had transformed our perception of life itself. And then, as twilight deepened, a faint movement in the trees caught my eye. A shadow, a flicker, just at the edge of vision. The bear, perhaps checking one last time, paused and looked toward the cabin. Its gaze met mine, and in that moment, I felt a deep, silent bond, a reminder that the story continues, that connection endures, and that the lessons of the forest are never truly finished. We knew that the bear's visits might never return in the same form. But its gift had already been given, awareness, reverence, and the courage to notice the extraordinary woven through ordinary life. And in that knowledge, a quiet peace settled over us. The forest, the bears, and the objects had left their mark, and in return, we carried their story into every sunrise, every shadow, every heartbeat. Even now, sometimes a feather drifts onto the porch, or a perfectly shaped stone appears in an unexpected place. And each time, we remember, the bear, the cub, and their quiet teachings live on in the way we see, feel, and honor the world around us. And perhaps, one day, new gifts will appear, new lessons will begin, and the forest will once again guide us toward wonder. The next morning, the forest seemed almost reverent. Sunlight filtered through the trees, creating golden shafts that illuminated dust motes and curling mist. We approached the porch with a sense of quiet anticipation, hearts still vibrating with the lessons of the last visits. The carved wooden figures remained in place, but the air felt different, charged, expectant, as if something extraordinary was about to occur. Mark bent down to inspect the amulet again. Its glow was stronger now, subtle but undeniable, as if holding a heartbeat of the forest within it. "I think today, it's going to show us the last part of its story," he whispered. I nodded, a shiver running through me. Every visit, every object had been a step toward this moment, and I felt a mix of awe, fear, and excitement. We followed the spiral of objects deeper into the woods. The patterns were more intricate than ever, stones nested in perfect arcs, pine cones aligned like tiny monuments, moss forming miniature hills that led toward a sun-dappled clearing. The forest itself seemed to bend in anticipation. Birds were silent, leaves hardly rustled, and the creek's usual babble was subdued. And there, in the center of the clearing, the adult bear and its cub awaited. But this time, something had changed. The adult bear stood tall, regal, and behind it, a smaller, almost hidden figure emerged. A second cub, eyes bright, stepping carefully onto the clearing. It was as if the bear had chosen this moment to reveal its full story, its family, its legacy. Between them lay the final gift, an enormous carved log, hollowed and filled with intricately detailed figures. Bears of every size, moss gardens, stones, feathers, and tiny forest creatures all arranged in harmony. The carvings seemed to tell a story in motion, a narrative of care, guidance, and continuity. The adult bear nudged the log gently toward us, a clear invitation to witness and absorb what had been prepared. Laura gasped, tears filling her eyes. "It's everything. Every visit, every object, it's all here. The lesson, the story, it's all been leading to this." I nodded, my own throat tight. The carvings spoke in silence, communicating patience, reverence, and the importance of connection. It was as if the bear had distilled the forest's wisdom into this single, tangible gift. The adult bear circled the log slowly, then gestured with its paw toward a small figure, a miniature version of the cub we had first seen. The gesture was deliberate, almost ceremonial, and the cub mirrored it exactly. Our breath caught. The scene was alive with intention. We realized that this was more than a gift. It was a lesson in legacy, in teaching, and in the quiet continuity of life. Mark bent to pick up one of the carvings. As he did, a faint warmth seemed to emanate from it, and a subtle vibration ran through his hands. "It's alive," he whispered. "Not in the way we think, but in the way it carries the forest, the life, the presence of the bears themselves." I reached out and touched a small feather placed delicately among the figures. A shiver ran up my spine. This was a bridge between worlds, a connection we had never imagined possible. The adult bear stepped back, the cubs following, leaving us alone with the carvings. Silence fell, yet it was alive, a tangible presence that filled the clearing. We walked slowly among the objects, absorbing the lessons: patience, attentiveness, presence, and reverence. Every curve, every feather, every stone spoke to the quiet majesty of life and the importance of noticing it. Then, as if the forest itself wished to mark the moment, a beam of sunlight broke through the canopy and illuminated the central figure of the adult bear in the log. The glow seemed to pulse gently, filling the clearing with warmth and light. It was a final affirmation. The story had reached its apex, the lesson complete, yet its influence would ripple outward endlessly. Laura knelt, placing her hand on the log. "It's not just about the bears," she whispered. "It's about noticing, honoring, and participating in the quiet magic around us. It's about seeing life in its smallest details." I nodded, tears slipping down my cheeks. The bear's story had become ours, Its lesson had been imprinted on our hearts. Suddenly, the adult bear stepped closer to us, nudging a single polished stone forward. On it was etched a spiral, similar to the ones we had followed for weeks. The spiral seemed to move subtly, as if alive, drawing us into contemplation. It was a message: continue the awareness, carry the lesson into life beyond the forest, and remain open to wonder. We sat in silence, absorbing the enormity of the moment. The cubs played nearby, but carefully, respecting the gravity of the encounter. The forest itself seemed to exhale, the wind whispering through the trees, carrying an invisible message of continuity and connection. Every rustle of leaves, every glimmer of sunlight, every bird's call felt infused with meaning. Finally, the adult bear retreated into the forest shadows, followed by the cubs. We remained in the clearing, holding the log, the amulet, and the carved figures. The silence was profound, but not empty. It was full of lessons, presence, and a quiet, ongoing connection to a world that often goes unnoticed. Mark turned to me, voice barely audible, "It's done. But it's never really over. The lesson, the awareness, it stays with us." I nodded, understanding that the bear had not simply visited. It had transformed the way we would perceive life forever. And though we would never see the forest the same way again, its teachings, its gifts, and its presence would echo through every sunrise, shadow, and quiet moment. Even now, sometimes a pine cone appears on the porch, or a feather drifts from nowhere, and we feel it again, the silent, enduring presence of the bear and the forest's quiet wisdom. Its story had reached its peak, but the lessons continue, carried in our hearts and the ordinary details of every day. The forest was quiet that evening, the golden light softening into twilight. The cabin porch glowed faintly, the carved figures and amulet catching the last rays of sun. Mark and I stood together, holding the final objects, hearts full of awe. Every visit, every gift, every subtle gesture from the bear had led to this moment, the culmination of weeks of lessons, wonder, and reflection. I looked toward the trees, half expecting a shadow, a rustle, a final glimpse of the bears. But the clearing was empty. The forest had returned to its natural rhythm, yet the energy lingered. It wasn't about seeing the bear again. It was about carrying the lesson forward, about seeing the world through the lens it had taught us, patient, attentive, reverent. Mark knelt to rearrange a few of the carved objects, placing them as carefully as we had seen the bear do. "It's like it left us a manual for life," he said quietly. I smiled, realizing that the true gift wasn't an object, it was awareness. Every pebble, feather, and carving had been a key to noticing, a way to honor the small wonders, and to feel connected to a world larger than ourselves. As the first stars appeared, I held the amulet in my hand and felt its warmth pulsing faintly, like a heartbeat. It reminded me of every lesson, every subtle gesture, every step we had taken in the forest. The bear's story was now woven into our own, a quiet presence shaping how we moved, observed, and lived. Laura leaned on my shoulder. "Do you remember that first morning, when it appeared out of nowhere?" she asked softly. I nodded, the memory sharp and vivid. The bear standing at the porch, the sense of awe, the unanswered questions that had kept us following, watching, and learning. We had entered the story halfway, uncertain, curious, and now we understood I realized then that the bear's final lesson was subtle but profound. Life is full of gifts hidden in plain sight. Sometimes they arrive unannounced, like a shadow in the trees or a carved figure on your porch. Sometimes they require patience, attention, and trust. And sometimes, they leave a mark that changes the way you see everything. That night, the forest whispered its secrets to those willing to listen. The rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the gentle flow of the creek. The bear's presence had become invisible but undeniable, its story embedded in the rhythm of life around us. Every object left behind, every carefully placed stone, every carved figure was a reminder that connection, reverence, and awareness were gifts to hold on to forever. Mark held my hand as we walked back to the cabin. "We were lucky," he said softly. "Not everyone gets to experience something like this." I nodded, knowing he was right. And yet, the beauty of the lesson was that it was always accessible, if only you paused, observed, and, as we reached the porch, a single feather drifted down from the trees, landing gently atop the carved amulet. I picked it up, feeling the weight of the story and the ongoing connection. The bear may have left physically, but its gifts continued to arrive in subtle ways, reminding us to notice, to wonder, and to cherish the extraordinary within the ordinary. I looked toward the forest one last time that night, the shadows deep and mysterious. Somewhere beyond the trees, the bears watched, their presence unseen but felt. And I knew this was not the final chapter. The story was still unfolding, and the forest still held surprises, lessons, and quiet gifts for those who approached it with patience, reverence, and an open heart. And so, the porch remained a place of quiet wonder, each carved figure, each stone, each feather a reminder that the extraordinary is always near. If we paused, if we noticed, if we trusted the rhythms of life, we could see it, feel it, and carry it forward. If this story touched you, if it made you pause and notice the quiet gifts around you, you belong here. Subscribe for more stories of wonder, connection, and the hidden lessons waiting in the world around us. And who knows, perhaps the next time you step onto a porch or wander into a forest, you'll find your own message left behind, waiting to change everything.